Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Double checked, and we already knew that the emails, we didn't see the emails, or the dog ate my homework defence of the British government's failure to join that joint procurement programme was not true. That's already been discredited twice, hasn't it? Again, I stress I'm suffering from a slight blurring of remembered information, but didn't Matt Hancock let slip on Question Time that they knew all about the scheme? And I've just looked at something that was dug up on March the 27th, an actual press conference, a recorded press conference in which members of the Commission directly addressed the question of whether or not the UK knew about it, and we did. So yesterday, the intervention by Simon MacDonald, the senior Foreign Office Mandarin, describing the political decision not to join as a political decision. Then he presumably got a roasting from Dominic Raab, if such a thing is possible, and then had to publish a humiliating letter climbing down from the position that it was a political decision. You remember the slogan. It didn't quite catch on as well as Brexit means Brexit, but breathing, Brexit before breathing was the way that some wag described it. That was clearly done, and now they've gone back to the email defence, which had already been discredited. But hey-ho, everything's going swimmingly, unless, of course, you're a patient trying to get into the Nightingale Hospital, where you run a very real risk of being turned away due to a nursing shortage, shortages that are a result of both austerity and cuts, and, of course, of the hostile environment that we have created in this country. People shouting, we should train our own, when it comes to doctors and nurses, will no doubt be volunteering to move to the back of the queue for treatment, so that those of us who don't care where you came from or what colour you are, we care only about your compassion and medical qualifications, we can all go in front of you, right, while you wait for your own to be trained up. So we'll probably have a look at those a little later in the programme. There's certainly much more cause for concern with every passing day. But I thought we'd have a contemplative. Simon Marks said something yesterday about the protests in America. I don't know if you heard it right at the end of this show. He talked about the frontier spirit that lies behind some of these, to our Anglo-Saxon sensibilities, staggering scenes of people almost demanding the right to die a horrible death in order to own the libs or whatever the logic may be. I don't want to oversimplify it, because I thought that phrase frontier spirit was really interesting. The question of how people can be taking to the streets of America to demand the right to risk their lives is one which clearly merits closer scrutiny, because I think we could say with some certainty that the people doing this don't realise that they're demanding the right to risk their lives. They think they're doing somebody else, something else. They think that they've got a proper motivation. And today I want to try to work out what that is.
Some people are here because of genuine fears about job losses and economic recession. Others are also here to push views on perennial American issues, always ready to voice their distrust in authority, disregarding the medical experts.
If asymptomatic people go back to work, they could infect other people who could die.
Okay, that's an interesting hypothesis.
It's a fact.
Yeah, sure it is.
You don't believe that? That's science. That's indisputable.
That's interesting. If they're asymptomatic, how do they know that they have it or don't have it?
Well, they don't. That's the point.
So it's mysterious. So it's just this thing that they're saying.
So what, is this all a big conspiracy theory?
It's your conspiracy theory.
My biggest fear right now is how quick American patriots crumbled and hid in their homes because their government told them that they should. We can't hide in our homes and not produce for our families and for future generations because of a virus that may kill us. So what do I say to the science? I say I don't believe your science because I believe my God.
Driving out of this Ohio parking lot is a woman who just attended a church service with dozens of other people, including children.
Can I ask you about your decision to go to church, to be inside that building?
I wouldn't be anywhere else.
Aren't you concerned you could infect other people if you get sick inside?
No.
People who don't go to this
No.
church?
I'm covered in Jesus' blood. I'm covered in Jesus'
But what
blood.
about other people who don't go to this church who you might encounter?
All of these people go to this church.
No, but you're going to be in places where other people
I go to the grocery store every day. I'm in Walmart,
What?
Home Depot, all of those
But you
people.
could get them sick from what happens in
They
the
could
church.
get me sick, but they're not because I'm covered in his blood. Thank you very much.
I'm conscious of a little bit of deja vu. It may well be a similar conversation to the one about how anybody with a fully functioning cerebral cortex could have ended up believing that phone masts were causing a virus. That conversation is still pertinent, given that the latest figures show half of the country, 50% of people polled, have seen this misinformation. It's by far the most prevalent COVID-19 related misinformation on social media. But I'm going to tell you something that I think is heartbreaking, and I don't share even a scintilla of the schadenfreude that some people have displayed in response to this story that I shared on social media before coming on air today. It breaks my heart. And that phrase, contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned, it holds true way beyond Brexit, you know. If someone has been persuaded to believe something that is both wrong and dangerous, I'm not here to say that they deserve our derision and dismissal immediately. I think you have to understand how they've ended up believing something so bonkers. And then, hopefully, you can lead them back towards the light before it's too late. Because it's too late for this guy. It's too late for John McDaniel of Marion County in Ohio. Was it Ohio in the news just then that is announcing plans to be the same governor? I'm not sure, but I digress. He's 60 years old. He was a protester against the lockdown. He took to social media to make a variety of points, including this one. If he doesn't have that authority, if you are paranoid about getting sick, just don't go out. It shouldn't keep those of us from living our lives. The madness has to stop. And there are echoes of this rancid rhetoric in the UK at the moment, in the UK political and media spheres. People who don't really feel any responsibility at all to try to understand things, but feel an overwhelming compulsion to have a pungent opinion about everything, will be talking about the lockdown in terms that are profoundly dangerous. Some of them, of course, also magnificently and miraculously discovering that poverty does exist in the United Kingdom, that food banks are up and down the nation, more so even than branches of McDonald's. What you might call poverty deniers, for some reason, in the context of COVID-19, have suddenly started caring about people who are struggling to make ends meet. It's an act of utter hypocrisy, which I would say was superseded only in the current climate by people cheering doctors and nurses who 3 years ago were signing up to this sort of editorial in The Sun. The new all-out pay strike by junior doctors is a declaration of war on the government, using patients as cannon fodder. If any die or even suffer, the young medics responsible must be struck off. If these militants and their hard-left union intend to up the ante in what has become an infantile and politically driven row over Saturday, same people signing up to the school of thought that called for doctors to be sacked in 2016 today have miraculously discovered a dewy-eyed reverence for precisely the same people. But enough about British hypocrisy. John McDaniel is dead. John McDaniel died of COVID-19 after branding his home state's lockdown measures. Well, we'll call it BS, shall we? Because this is a family programme, and I appreciate not every child in the country will necessarily have voluntarily signed up to do their schoolwork this morning. He's dead. An anti-lockdown protester who railed against COVID-19 closures in his home state has died of coronavirus. This is a man who posted on his own Facebook page the following words a few days ago. Does anybody have the guts to say this COVID-19 is a political ploy? Asking for a friend, prove me wrong. Now, this is not dissimilar to a question I've asked you about gun ownership in the past. I think it's that great Oscar Wilde line, isn't it, about two countries divided by a common language. We don't have as much in common with our American cousins as we often think that we do, because our shared history is, well, there's not a lot of it, you know. Post-independence, America and the United Kingdom may well have continued to speak the same language, but they've embarked on rather different paths. And what Simon Marks described yesterday as frontier spirit means to me, as a Brit, a curious attitude to government. When you talk to Americans about why the right to bear arms is so important, they often display, I think Trump was playing into this when he talked his twaddle about the deep state. They often display a profound fear of central government, as if the pendulum of politics were to swing, they would feel that the government had become their enemy and that they would need guns to defend themselves. Now, when you were talking about flintlock pistols and muskets, possibly you could see that they had a point. But now you've got rednecks all over the land, tooled up with automatic weapons, capable of killing hundreds of people in the blink of an eye, as we know, most obviously from the massacres that occur as regularly as clockwork in America. The idea that you could use that to defend yourself against the biggest military operation on the planet, or one of the biggest military operations on the planet, has always struck me as a little bit ridiculous. But there's no schadenfreude to be had from the death of John McDaniel. Some people suggesting he should be entered posthumously for the Darwin Awards, a sort of annual recognition of people who have hurt themselves by behaving very stupidly. I just feel enormously sorry for him and his family. And I want to know how this was done to him. How could an articulate, presumably decent, 60-year-old man be persuaded that a global pandemic is fake news to the point where he exposes himself to entirely unnecessary risk and ends up dead? I'll give you a clue, an early clue, but then I hope you'll draw on your deeper understanding and knowledge of America to perhaps flesh it out a little further. So here's an early clue from Fox News. Where else?
If you are over the mass hysteria, if you're over politicizing and weaponizing of the coronavirus, you are not alone.
I think that it's being totally blown out of proportion.
The national left-wing media playing up fears of the coronavirus.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing.
Everybody has gone totally crazy about it. You need to conduct your life normally.
I'm not afraid of the coronavirus, and no one else should be that afraid either.
It's a great time to just go out, go to a local restaurant. Yeah. Likely you can get in easily.
At worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
Call me crazy, but I am far more concerned with stepping on a used heroin needle than I am getting the coronavirus.
You know, we have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that get better just by, sitting around and even going to work. Some of them go to work, but they get better.
I think we've got to be very real with the American people. I don't like how we are scaring people unnecessarily.
All the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality. Without a vaccine, the flu would be far more deadly.
To close down a whole building or a whole block or a whole concert or a whole school is a vast overreaction.
Even when there's an infected person amongst thousands and thousands, in our case over 10,000 people, it is very, very difficult to contract this virus.
I think that we're blowing this one out of proportion. I'm a little disturbed that I think some of it is being politically driven. I think that, and that bothers me, that we're scaring people for political reasons.
The fear is so out of proportion to the medical risk right now that that's what's choking down the economy. That's going to continue.
They're scaring the living hell out of people, and I see it again as like, oh, let's bludgeon Trump with this new hoax.
One person gets the virus, and everybody who works in that office building told to stay home.
That's an overreaction. That's an overreaction.
We've shut down all the schools, all the restaurants, and all the bars. That doesn't pass the smell test with me.
In your state, there have been 18 cases of COVID-19. 2 people, sadly, have died, but both of those residents were elderly and had traveled internationally. So when you hear the context, it's not quite as scary.
This is a psychological problem. I was on a flight from Toronto to D.C. 2 days ago. The flight was 1/3 full. How many cases do you have in Canada? 2, 3? I think people are grossly overreacting to this.
It's actually the safest time to fly. Everyone I know that's flying right now, terminals are pretty much dead, ghost towns. And then the planes, remember back in the day when you had a seat next to you possibly empty, you could stretch out a little more? It's like that on every flight now.
We have to be better safe than sorry. And you know what? That's the strategy of losers, not the strategy of winners. So now we're judging everything on better safe than sorry. Now, a coach would be fired for that line of, a CEO would be fired for that line of thinking. Why are we going down that line with our country? This isn't my America anymore.
Last week, Broadway attendance went up. Last week, movie receipts were normal. We don't need to talk ourselves into a recession or let anyone else with ulterior motives talk us into a recession.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president. And sadly, it seems they care very little
for any of the destruction they are leaving in their wake. Losses in the stock market, all this, unfortunately, just part of the political casualties for them.
America now has the highest infection rate and the highest death rate in the world, and a president who's pretending that he wasn't complicit in any of the positioning that you just heard. So that's part of the answer, but that's just the thing that is being fed to people. It's the willingness to swallow it I'd like your help in examining. So if you can tell me, you take as long as you want actually, why are people in America protesting against measures put in place to keep them alive? 0345 6060 973. Are we now at the place where these poor saps think that they're somehow owning the libs by suffocating to death alone at home? 0345 6060 973. I've got some breaking news for you as well. This is domestic. Armed police officers in Kent are currently responding to reports of a man with weapons, that's all we know, at Chatham Dockside. So we will, of course, bring you the very latest on that story as soon as we can. And it's a headline that in many ways encapsulates the avoidable horror of what is unfolding all over the world at the moment, and the astonishingly irresponsible role that this profession, the media, can play in the process. Anti-lockdown protester who said it was a political ploy is killed by coronavirus. And the question I have for you is, how could he have been persuaded to that position? It's not enough just to say Fox News, although the little collection of clips I played you a moment ago makes it clear that they are complicit in this sort of tragedy. But you can watch Fox News and know that it's hokum. What is it about these people who, I can say this as kindly as I can, who can't see through the crud? How do you end up believing that measures designed to keep you alive are somehow a political ploy designed to oppress you? And you end up believing it so completely that your belief kills you. It's quite incredible. Before we get stuck into that, LBC's correspondent Rachel Venables joins me for an update on these reports of a man with weapons prompting armed police response at Chatham Dockside in Kent. Rachel, what do we know?
James, we've had a brief statement through from Kent Police saying that armed officers have been deployed near to a shopping centre in Kent this morning. This is after a man was reported to be on a balcony with weapons, and the public are now being warned to stay away from an area which is in Dockside in Chatham. They say they got called, the police, at 8:35 this morning to a disturbance at a flat that's in Dockhead Road, and a spokesman has said that members of the public reported seeing a man on a balcony with weapons. Patrols, armed officers, they are at the scene right now making inquiries. Footage from the scene certainly seems to show police helicopter overhead. You can see the officers have arrived there. They've filled the road with cars. You can see sirens on as well, and police have certainly locked down the area. Road closures in place. There's also footage on social media, and I need to stress at this time that this is unverified, but it does seem to show a man shouting, pacing on what looks like a top floor balcony, waving what does look like to be a large gun around, shouting as well. Separate videos of the same building show what appears to be the sound, possibly of gunshots. All of that unverified at the moment. We have had no reports of any injuries, and so far, as I mentioned, Kent Police telling us that they have had reports of a man on a balcony with weapons in Dockhead Road in Chatham. Armed officers are in the area. This is a developing story, of course, a developing picture, and we'll bring you more as soon as we get it.
Thank you, Rachel. Indeed, we will. More on that story as and when it develops. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. The question is it's an important one, but it is also something of a diversion from the almost unleavened diet of death and disease that we find ourselves forced to serve up at the moment, quite rightly, compelled rather than forced, I think. These protests in America are breathtaking. People demanding the right to risk their lives unnecessarily? Or is it more sophisticated, more subtle than that? I'd love to take as many calls as I can on this, because it's a question of profound human importance. And yet, of course, like everything else, it runs a risk of just being turned into ammunition for the culture wars. Matt's in High Wycombe. Matt, what do you think?
Hi, James. I've got maybe one or two things that explain it, so just humour me for a little bit. The first thing I think is, beyond the right-wing division, there is actually a genuine economics thing. I'm not saying that health outweighs economics, but in the US, they're very closely tied. So, for example, let's say you were right-wing, but, not well, if you work for a business, your healthcare isn't free. It's tied to your employment. So, many cases, and these people would never express
you're
this
lucky.
properly.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, but I'm saying there is a thing of people can be crazy and right-wing and genuinely fear for the loss of employment during this time. There's also obviously the straight-up greed explanation where...
what about the signs that we see saying things like, we need haircuts and I want to play golf? I mean, economic desperation, and I'm sure you're not doing this, but economic desperation was used as a camouflage for base and vile racism during the presidential campaign. People claimed that it was economic concerns when it was nothing of the sort. People holding up signs saying, we need a haircut or we want to play golf are not in the category you described. So the psychology of I'll say the scary ones, the psychology of the people who, like this guy was quite well off. He wasn't by any stretch of the imagination poverty stricken, and he's now dead because he thought it was a political ploy. So people who think it's a political ploy don't fit into the category you describe.
Yeah, I hear what you say. I mean, what I could say in this, I'll bash Americans on this, but I also think we've got to guard against this tendency in the UK. Is many people live very difficult lives. In my experience, I'll just speak about my cousin. She's not from the UK, only has a high school education, moved there on the strength of her hard work and basically self-taught, has been employed in the hospitality business for ages, has a good job. And just after Obama had gotten elected, she came back to where I'm from. And I said, well, I'm really looking forward to him sort of turning things around because, Bush was so useless. And then she said something to the effect of, she's not a right-winger, she's just apolitical. She said something to the effect of, politicians are all kind of the same. So, here you have someone comparing probably one of the worst presidents before Trump with, at that stage, probably the most inspirational presidents.
Just seeing this sense that they're all the same. But then,
exactly.
You'd need to explain why anyone would believe. You see, Trump, I stumbled on something yesterday that I'm going to hit you over the head with 100 times in the coming weeks. The idea that Trump tosses a coin and then shouts heads and tails and claims victory when it lands. And I'm absolutely owning that. But the problem is that even if all politicians are the same, why would any politicians want you to stay at home and damage the economy unless it was for your own good? That's the leap I can't make. Everything you've said makes sense up until the point where I say, but why would they want to do that? Well,
and if I can just answer that, my sort of sense of it is that Americans in general are kind of numbed out. And on the far right stage, they're not numbed out, but what I'm saying is they're numbed out to kind of critical thinking. They want to be told. The BBC is not always a paragon, but if you watch, for example, interviews with politicians in the US, I'm talking about kind of Maher style or an Eddie Mayer style thing, you'll be shocked at how softball questions are from both left and right.
Okay.
And
so there's a space into which this skepticism can move on a scale that we don't see front and center in this country. In this country, it's largely confined to sort of hate sites on the internet, blogs and social media. We don't see it. We don't have a Fox News on the telly, and we don't have a softball. That's helpful. I've got to crack on. I've got to take at least one more call before the break, Matt, because the switchboard's gone bonkers. Thank you for that. You covered a lot of ground, very thoughtful, which is the conversation that I want to have, actually. Some breaking news for you. A man in his 30s has now been arrested on suspicion of firearms offences. Kent Police have just announced there are patrols remaining at the scene. Officers have located 4 suspected imitation firearms as part of their inquiry. So thankfully it would seem that situation has been addressed without any casualties. More on that as and when it develops. I'll squeeze in Mark, who is in I don't know if I should squeeze you in, Mark. I've just read on my screen that you're a professor of American politics, so giving you the 90 seconds remaining before the break will perhaps be a little previous. Let me put you on hold, if I may, with apologies, because I just cut Matt off saying that I needed to speak to at least one other person before the break. We may go to the news a tiny bit early so that we can come back to Mark as soon as possible. To be absolutely clear, I'm asking this question in some ways. Even I don't have a sufficiently elevated view of my own importance to think that we could actually save any lives by doing this, but we could at least take a few steps in that direction, couldn't we? So a man writes on Facebook, and we've all seen stuff similar to this in the context of hoaxes and conspiracy theories, whether it was during the Brexit referendum or whether it was linked to the 5G nonsense that's sweeping this country at the moment. We've all seen on our Facebook posts things pop up that are utterly at odds with reality, and people we like and love and care for and know and care about have apparently believed it. So when this guy wrote, does anybody have the guts to say this COVID-19 is a political ploy, asking for a friend, prove me wrong, and then not long after that he's actually dead of COVID-19. The question of how you end up in that sort of mental space, psychological, intellectual space, is utterly baffling to me. But then, as you know, I've spent the last 3.5 years being utterly baffled by the willingness of British people to either believe things that aren't true or to pretend that they believe things which aren't true in order to upset the other side. Is there an element of that here? So sensible people, educated people, expert people, they go down one path, and disillusioned people, dispossessed people, angry people somehow feel that they're exerting power by going down the other path. Donald Trump, of course, doesn't help. He shouts heads and tails every time he tosses a coin and then claims victory, and half the country points out that he's a malignant fraudster, and the other half somehow thinks that he's won the coin toss. So that's part of it. But the idea that you can think it's a political ploy and then end up dead, that you can take to the streets of your hometown waving a banner that says we need haircuts, I mean, good God, we're baffled by the 5G hoax. This is a whole new level of madness, and hopefully we can come to a slightly better understanding of it together this morning. Apologies to Mark, who's in Brittany. I'll come to you imminently, I promise. That's the word I want, isn't it, when I keep saying momentarily? I mean imminently. But first, Theo Usherwood is here, just to give us a brief explainer on what we can expect from PMQs today, with, of course, the opening salvo, Theo Usherwood, that it's Keir Starmer's first PMQs as Labour leader, unfolding in, to use that word that's being used an unprecedented amount of times at the moment, it's unfolding in unprecedented circumstances.
Strange times. Prime Minister's Questions begins, as usual, at noon, but it's going to be very, very different. So Keir Starmer has opted to face Dominic Raab, who is, of course, deputising for the Prime Minister Boris Johnson as he recovers at Chequers. So Keir Starmer does have the option, or did have the option, had he chosen to step away and allow one of his shadow cabinet to fill in for him, given that the Prime Minister isn't going to be at the dispatch box, but he's decided actually to take this as his first opportunity to face Dominic Raab, who is, of course, the first Secretary of State across the dispatch box. Both are going to be in the chamber. There had been speculation that they could appear via Zoom video link, and alongside them will be a limited number of their respective front benches, and then in total 50 MPs in the House of Commons. And then up to another 120 will be able to dial in, but of course 120 aren't going to be able to ask questions, but the rest will be asking questions via Zoom, but they won't be allowed follow-ups, and there's going to be no bobbing. That's when MPs hop up and down to try and catch the Speaker's eye. I'm trying to bob now in this seat, but it's not going to quite work. But they jump up to try and catch the Speaker's eye, and then Sir Lindsay Hoyle, previously John Bercow, can say, well, OK, you can ask a question at this opportunity. It's a strict rule. There's a list system, and Sir Lindsay Hoyle is going to work his way through that list, taking MPs both from inside the chamber and outside the chamber to ask questions, but no follow-ups, and there won't be heckling. And some MPs, experienced MPs, people like Chris Bryant, have been questioning whether it will have the same atmosphere, and MPs will get the same ability to scrutinise ministers, including Dominic Raab, given that they won't be able to ask follow-up questions.
And we'll catch up together, shall we? Shall we listen to it all and then have a bit of a confab afterwards?
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to it. I think there is even the possibility we could take it live.
Yes, no, I think we will take it.
We will take it
to listen to it otherwise, am I? Whilst simultaneoly presenting a live radio show here. You sure you're ready to come back to work? You sure you're fully across everything? LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood, writing movingly in the Telegraph about his own recent experiences with COVID-19, but also joining us a little later to pick over the bones of PMQs. Back now to a question that I'm really fascinated in your answers to. How can anybody, let alone this poor soul who's now dead, end up believing that the lockdown or the calls for quarantine, self-isolation, social distancing are, and I quote this poor fella who's passed away, a political ploy? We've chronicled a lot of the madness of American politics, but, well, for me at least, this looks like a grisly new chapter. Mark is in Wren in Brittany, and I've already blown your cover, a professor of American politics. What's your take on this, Mark?
It's very interesting because I think it's kind of the culmination of many, many years of discrediting the federal government and not believing them, not believing anything they say, which combined with the kind of, as you say, frontier mentality, which has played itself out. I grew up in Austin, Texas in the 1980s, so I knew people who were into guns and kind of their mentality about it. And Austin is relatively liberal compared to the rest of Texas.
The word relatively is doing a lot of lifting there, isn't it?
Exactly. But it really is that idea that they need the guns to protect them, that it's a check against undue government interference, yes. and you do have the kind of strain of that, kind of the survivalist. You have the Ruby Ridge and the other survivalist types, and so it kind of makes sense that at a certain point where the especially under Republican administration, the role of the federal government has been belittled at the same time that and discredited, in favor of neoliberal economic supply side and all that. And then so when the government is supposed to do something that it's supposed to do, like protect protect public health, and at the same time, its ability to do that has been eroded severely, certainly starting under Reagan, but certainly under Trump as well, to where the agencies which could make a difference, in terms of public health, have been basically neutered. And so you have this emergency situation where, you have the states having to fend for themselves, them having to get their own, protective equipment. You inject into that basically an economic terror because of what's happening, and to people who were already, living on the edge economically, and so. And it kind of also pours into a strain of kind of what you could call a particular breed of American exceptionalism, that we're not, we're not subject to the same things that other people are. I mean, I think that this is rapidly disproven, but it's kind of this, this witch's brew of, kind of contempt for the government, and also the whole idea of having a lockdown where people are kept in their house, even though it's, obviously for their own good.
And yet that's the bit, isn't it? Right there. It's a fascinating analysis and very compelling. But that last little synapse, for me, doesn't fire. I wonder whether it does for you. Or I wonder, actually, whether we're trying to rationalise the irrational. But the point at which if I were to say to John McDaniel or anybody else protesting against health measures, why would the government want to do this dishonestly? What would they say, if that's not too speculative a question?
That is pretty speculative for myself, but I would think just I mean, they've been talking for years about government tyranny and and we have to arm because because one day the government's been tyrannical. So for them,
so they fear a kind of a takeover almost. Life, liberty in the American way. They feel that this is an assault upon their liberty, but you've got to be there already, haven't you, for this to look like evidence? You've got to already think that the government has got a secret plan to enslave the population, or what? I don't
It's
quite
part
know.
of that. Well, it goes back to the kind of Barry Goldwater libertarian
Yes.
mentality of more government equals less liberty.
Yes.
And so when they see that they are actually depriving, by their logic, if you were depriving them of liberty, as they see it, by having to stay home in what is called lockdown, which sounds more tyrannical than it is. I mean, it's just stay home. It's not, there aren't locks on the door. You're not physically prevented from leaving. But then again, it's an affirmation of these deeply held fears that have been, that have been fed and, nurtured over the years of the government taking over. And so and a lot of this is also backed by the Koch brothers and these other right-wing groups that want to use populism to put economic pressure to open the economy because their businesses are suffering. But they want to make it appear as a popular movement. So a lot of these have been fomented by the DeVoses and these other groups, and these other, the Koch brothers and others that are fomenting it to put pressure, to put popular pressure to open the economy to help them, but in fact they're leading them to slaughter, basically.
And so this is the weapons grade version of our own little pound shop operations, refusing to reveal who funds them, but agitating for less government and lower taxes for rich people. Once you get that mindset established in the public or in some parts of the public, then they can be persuaded that anything the government does is somehow designed to diminish their individual rights.
Exactly. It's especially economic. And so when they say, I want to get a haircut, I want my job back, I want to work. But the thing is, they don't think, well, why can't, you get a universal basic income so that these people can be kept economically whole during this process, and then once it's over, it can go back, which is more what they're doing in France, basically. Where they're economically supporting people during this time. You don't have that in the States, and certainly not. You have unemployment insurance, which is very difficult to get. They've given a little bit more money. But the thing is that they've been grown up on this, kind of libertarian, pull yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. I don't need the government. I don't need any, and so I don't want to, I saw one protester saying, I don't want to hand out, I want to work. Whereas, if they, you could look at it very, very differently. Say, well, the government, they're spending all this money on, keeping the stock prices high. They could easily spend, that money to give people a certain amount of money a month to keep them, so they can pay their rent and mortgage.
And simplistically, perhaps, but in the pursuit of brevity, the paper trail goes back ultimately to extremely wealthy individuals, often making money out of climate damaging businesses and commercial operations, who really, and I don't think normal people can quite get their head around this, who really do care only about seeing their own bottom line increase exponentially every day. That is literally the only thing that informs their existence.
Yeah, it was very similar with the Tea Party back in 2010 or so, because what they did was you had the bank bailouts and justified rage against the bank bailouts, but the right wing groups, the Koch brothers group, were able to turn that anger, organize into the Tea Party to basically pursue. So what was founded on genuine rage against the bank, the bank bailouts, was baited and switched to go against, the Obama administration.
And you end up persuading people to vote against their own interests because they've somehow been persuaded that their own interests are being attacked by the people who are actually trying to protect them. And that leads us beautifully back or grisly back to the poor guy who's dead because he believed that COVID-19 was a political ploy. What an amazing call. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again, Mark. Have you published at all? Do you want to plug a book or anything while you're here?
Not at the moment. The main book I've done is in French. But
okay.
Anyway,
Well, I could probably struggle through, but when it gets translated, ring me back and we'll give you. We're big fans of plugging books on this program, not just my own. It is coming up to 11:15. Wow, and again, you know, this notion of these these sinister, extremely wealthy individuals trying to manipulate an entire population into enriching them further while we get poorer, or in this case, in the case of COVID-19. We get dead. And of course, some of the pound shop equivalents of the movements that Mark described aren't just in Britain, but they are now in government. Some of the people who've moved on from the secretly funded think tanks and organisations have now moved into the heart of this government. Quite remarkable, really, how little coverage it gets. I suspect because of the parasitic relationship, you know, between the media and the gatekeepers. And back to Matters American in a moment. Before that, I want to talk to Professor Martin Green, who is the Chief Executive of Care England, the largest representative body for independent social care services in the UK. And it's hard to know where to start, Martin, actually. Should we start with the FT's number crunching today and the suggestion that the number of deaths in care homes is going to leave the overall death toll as much as double what it currently is? Or would you prefer to talk about the struggles that your members are facing?
Well, I think let's start, James, with the statistics. And I think one of the challenges that we've had is that, first of all, the statistics that we've been relying on from the government, which they've been announcing every day, has only included those people who might be dying in hospital. Now, when you consider that the care home population are probably the most susceptible to this virus, in that they are older people predominantly, and they also have a range of different health issues. So they are really in the most vulnerable group. So I think what we've got to do is we've got to get the statistics representing what's actually happening, not only in care homes, but also in the community more widely. And why I think that's important, James, is because for two reasons. Firstly, we need to know exactly what the scale of this pandemic is, and that will be important when we're making decisions about how we relieve lockdown. But the second thing is, as we see more and more people in care homes succumbing to the virus, it means we have to focus our priorities on care homes to keep people safe.
When did you begin to worry, if that's not too crass a question, either about the fact that the casualties and the deaths that you would know about, that your members would be dealing with, were not being mentioned in the daily briefings, or when perhaps, and I don't want to put any words in your mouth, you began to feel that despite the scale of the pandemic and despite the scale of the crisis, care homes were once again being a little ignored?
Well, I began to worry about this when I heard what was happening in both Italy and Spain. And I think then when the pandemic hit us, I was really conscious that obviously people were talking endlessly about the NHS, and I appreciate why that was. But I was also conscious that all the people in care homes, whether they were older people or indeed people with a learning disability or a brain injury, or indeed some people with mental health issues, have a range of different health problems. So I was in the space where I knew that those people were in the top priority group in terms of the people who could potentially have the worst impact of this virus. But of course, the focus of attention, both in terms of PPE, the media, and the public's engagement, was the NHS. So that really concerned me. And we've done a lot. And I have to say also, I want to pay tribute to people in government and opposition parties and people in the NHS England and in the Department of Health and Social Care, because everybody, once they got a real clear view about this, has worked very hard to try and improve things. But what I also want to say, James, is this is an unparalleled... I've seen the like of this. So it's not surprising in a way that we're all running to stand still a bit.
That's a very good point, and a very important one, actually, with accusation and counter-accusation being thrown around by everybody, sometimes rightly, but as you just imply, I think, sometimes perhaps at least prematurely and potentially wrongly. With that in mind, the Care Minister, Helen Whately, today, again, unable to provide a number unable to provide numbers of how many people are dying in our care homes. The sort of unlikely hero of the hour, Piers Morgan, has really taken her to task this morning, saying these are elderly and vulnerable people dying of COVID-19, and you're not taking the death seriously because she can't provide a number, not because she won't. Is that fair? I mean, would you expect a care minister, or indeed the government, to have a better handle on the numbers by now? Or is it, as you say, perhaps a symptom of the speed with which we've been engulfed, and therefore rather more forgivable than Piers Morgan allows?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I think Piers Morgan's handling of the care minister has been beyond disgraceful, actually.
Oh, do you?
Yes, I do, because Piers Morgan seems to think that he is making his name out of being hostile and aggressive. Well, actually, we need to move beyond that. The care minister is dealing
He's clearly not here to defend himself. But I take your point. I'd move you towards the question then of whether the care minister, whether the government should now be able to provide numbers. I'm not sure it's Helen Whately's fault that she can't, but the bigger picture, perhaps. Go on.
Well, exactly. And I think what the problem is, the minister is working with the data that she's got. And one of the things this pandemic has exposed is the fact that even in a digital age, we are not getting real-time data. It is not good enough to have data that is 12 days out of date, as the current data is. Now, I think that the minister has really identified that. Colleagues at the Care Quality Commission are working with the ONS, and what we should be getting in the next week, I think, is more up-to-date data. We'll be getting that on a weekly basis. I would really like to see this data on a daily basis. I'm not sure how possible that is, but I would really like to see that. And so, I think we've got to realise that our current systems, one of the things that I want to come out of this when the inevitable inquiry happens, is a really forensic analysis of what we need to do to make sure our systems are fit for purpose in the 21st century. And I don't want the inquiry to be about mudslinging or blaming. I want the inquiry to be a forensic analysis of what went on, how we could improve things, so that when we face the next pandemic, as inevitably we will, we'll be better prepared. And that should be our focus. First of all, our focus needs to be not mudslinging, but delivering what we need in the midst of this. Then we need to go into very clear critical analysis, which is not a blame game. It's saying, how do we do things better? And then we need to revise all our systems and all our organisations to make sure that they're nimble and quick enough to be able to respond to things as they happen.
With that in mind, why was the status quo so unfit for purpose?
Well, I think part of the problem is, and I think it's an element of all organisations that get big and bureaucratic, they focus on the process rather than the outcome. And what they do is they develop huge and complex processes. And that's great when you're trying to have an audit trail in the best of all scenarios. But what I think we've seen is that we need a culture shift as well as perhaps a review of some organisations. And the culture shift needs to be about when you're in the midst of a pandemic, the like of which we've never seen before, it might be the moment when you have to put the rule book into the shredder and say, what do we need to do and how do we make sure we do it quickly?
Yes, I'm with respect, I'm going to push you again on that question of and I appreciate that the scale of the sector is something that makes it hard to manage in a conventional sense. But let me just speak personally, having spoken to a lot of people who've lost relatives in care homes and have nothing but praise for the individual members of staff, but who are perhaps a little puzzled by some of the elements that have emerged in the last few weeks. Why was the sector not better equipped to cope with something like this?
Well, the sector was well equipped to cope with these issues. But again, I go back to the point, James. Every single person who is in a care home, particularly a care home for older people, are in the most vulnerable category. Now, every year we deal with flu pandemics, we deal with norovirus, we understand issues about the control of infectious diseases. But if you get a disease and a virus that is different to the normal pattern, which this one is, and also when this started, we weren't clear about what it was doing. So we didn't necessarily have a situation where everybody was locked down, though I must say one of the things that I think care homes did was they locked down much quicker than the rest of the world, and that's probably saved huge numbers of lives. So I think what we need to understand is that if you have a community of people who are the most vulnerable people, if unfortunately a virus does get into those care homes, then it's going to have the most dire consequences, far greater consequences than would happen in the normal population.
And of course, to that end, and in the spirit of your response, Professor Martin Green, I would add that all of the people I have spoken to, with the exception of staffing issues, where homes have simply not been able to get the numbers of staff in that they would like to because of self-isolation and quarantine, everybody I've spoken to, even in the midst of their grief, have been spoken in the highest possible terms about the members of staff in the actual homes, in the actual care homes. It is, as you suggest, it's very important to remember that. Many thanks for your time, Professor Martin Green. No, thank you, and I hope we'll talk again. The Chief Executive of Care England, the largest representative body for independent social care services in the UK, calling really for a root and branch reform of the entire sector. 10:57 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's squeeze in Paul. Actually, I've not got time. Let's have another listen. Here's another clip from the American media that perhaps adds a little evidence in the prosecution when we ask the question, how have people like John McDaniel, whose story really touched me this morning, it broke my heart actually, a bloke who'd been protesting against the lockdown because he thought COVID-19 was some sort of hoax, has now died of COVID-19 and left a youngish family behind. Here's his president at a press
rallies in February and in March, and there are some Americans.
I don't know about rallies. I really don't know about rallies. I know one thing. I haven't left the White House in months, except for a brief moment to give a wonderful ship the comfort.
You held a rally in March.
I don't know. Did I hold a rally? I'm sorry, I hold a rally. Did I hold a rally? Let me tell you, in January, when I did this, you had virtually no cases and no deaths, and yet I put it on. So how could I not?
That's incredible, right? I mean, did I hold a rally? I didn't hold a rally. I did hold a... What did I say to you yesterday? This is, by the way, my new Rosetta Stone, my new skeleton key for understanding how these fraudulent, populist, racist demagogues operate. They toss a coin and they shout heads and tails. And then when it lands, they can tell the base they got it right. The rest of us know exactly what's happened. We can watch it happening in real time like we just did there. We can hear it. It's like a guy calls COVID-19 a hoax and then claims that he was the first person to call it a pandemic and then claims that nobody told him it was a pandemic and then bans immigration in the hope of just sowing a seed that would sprout into a belief that it's all the fault of foreigners. It's literally all they do. But of course, pointing it out every blinking day doesn't necessarily get through the thickest of skulls.
Obviously, there's speculation it could get worse. Some say, like the president, it could miraculously disappear.
It's not the virus that's hurting the economy. It is the fear of the virus. People, in my opinion, are overreacting. I'm not saying this isn't serious, but this idea, Bill, that every sports event is going to get canceled and people can't gather, for dinner and you can't go out and everybody's going to hibernate in their caves, that's ridiculous.
They've got to stay home for 2 weeks. I'm saying, wait a minute, the whole city of Seattle, they have like 20 cases. It's a vast overreaction.
I think that this is going to come and it's going to go. I think that we have it under control. I think that President Trump's task force is magnificent.
It was quick, too.
I think it's very important for the American public to understand that our president and his administration, President Trump, has taken unprecedented steps and measures to contain this virus. We have it under control. It's contained. We have the resources to keep it contained.
What he's doing right now, from the standpoint of history, is almost perfect. It looks like he was born for this moment.
And congratulations to you, to the administration, to the president for what you are doing, because within this country, it seems to be under control and every safeguard taken.
Excuse me, show me the mess.
Yeah.
I don't see any deaths. I see a good, strong containment effort.
Your numbers are absolutely perfect, and I think that's actually where we're going to net out. It's not going to be that big of a deal.
It's just strange to me how so many are overreacting. And it makes you wonder if there's a political reason for that. It's impeachment didn't work, and the Mueller report didn't work, and Article 25 didn't work, and so maybe now this is their next attempt to get Trump.
If I'm an employer and I say to my employees, you got to travel, you got to get out there, you got to go there, you got to go here, you got to go there, and they get it, or they end up in quarantine, I smell a lawsuit. That's the problem, isn't it?
The hate is boiling over, many in the liberal media using, and I mean using, coronavirus in an attempt to demonize and destroy the president.
I can't believe I'm on national television saying that Democrats are cheering for a virus because they hate Donald Trump so much. Well, and that's what it is.
And the facts are actually pretty reassuring, but you never know it watching all this stuff. Now, while the number of infected persons is more than 650 now, the death toll has increased to 26, the risk to the average person does remain quite low.
And that is that unless you have an immune system that's compromised, and you are older, and you have other underlying health issues, you are not going to die 99% from this virus, correct?
That's correct, John. This is a contagious virus. We're concerned about it. We don't have a vaccine for it. But there's no reason to believe that it's actually more problematic or deadly than influenza.
Fair answer. You know, I do sometimes wonder whether or not it's a little bit self-indulgent almost to spend time wondering how people can end up in positions of abject and objective idiocy. And I use the word idiocy with a degree of charity, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to end up in a position of abject idiocy today. An awful lot of effort is put into leading people to positions of idiocy, to, voting ultimately to damage their own lives because they've been persuaded of a non-existent enemy, or they've had their xenophobia weaponized to such a degree that they think everything should be subsumed under the umbrella of treating foreigners worse than we currently do. You don't end up in these positions. I know some of you think I'm naive when I say this, and you think some people are just born rank, but they're not. Nobody's born rank. We're all products of our environments and our influences. And what I find so fascinating about these conversations is that theoretically, most of us are products of the same influences and environments, potentially, as our friends and family members and colleagues who've ended up believing utter bilge, whether it's about 5G masts and coronavirus in this country, or, of course, whether it's about the European Union being an enemy of polar bears, or whatever it was your Auntie Doris stuck on Facebook before voting, or in America now, the belief that the government would actively and dishonestly encourage the population to protect itself from a virus for nefarious reasons. So we got close. Brilliant caller from France, a professor of American politics. But for me, that final synapse is still missing. But then I spent 3.5 years trying to find it with Brexit voters and didn't. That final synapse where, if that's the right word to use in this context, where I understand this, and this, but why would John McDaniel, who's dead now, if he was still alive and we said to him, but why would the government do this? Why would they deliberately damage the economy, damage the country's infrastructure, unless they honestly believed it to be preferable to all alternatives? Why would they do it? What would they say? Or, of course, if you want to come at it from a different angle, what do you think pushes people into positions of fatal ignorance? It's a phrase I don't think I've ever used before. Fatal ignorance. People are sold tickets for ghost trains, and now, at the end of the ride, they could be dead. And none of the things that they believed were frightening even existed. It's incredible, isn't it? Paul's in Portsmouth. Paul, sorry to keep you. What would you like to say?
That's okay, mate. Thank you very much for taking my call. Well, what's actually even more fascinating, James, is that...
I'll be the judge of that.
Okay, what is actually interesting is that they voted in Donald Trump. So a lot of people at those rallies, for example, I've been watching it on the news a lot, they tend to have been on the right-wing persuasion. And the professor was saying that
generally.
a lot... generally, not all, of course. But the professor was even saying that even the right-wing people who, bear arms or against abortion, anything like that, they don't like government at all. Okay, they believe in smaller government because they're Republicans. Okay, that's all well and good. Well, your man's in charge. Okay,
yes,
so,
exactly.
I want Donald Trump in charge. Okay? He's not a politician. Okay, he's a businessman. He's going to do
Drain the swamp. Drain the swamp.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
He's a businessman who managed to go bankrupt while running a casino, which is an astonishing achievement when you think of it. 3 times, I think. Yeah.
And Trump University. Can't forget about that.
Yes, but anyway, we digress. Back to COVID.
Yeah,
so but you're only adding to my confusion, aren't you? Because theoretically, with Trump in the White House, these people should be behaving differently from how they're behaving now. Which is why he's trying to put that wedge between him and the governors, right? So that again he can shout heads and tails.
Yes, exactly. So he's basically turned around to all the governors and said, do your own thing, guys, okay? If you're the governor of the state of Virginia...
But he's also said, I have total control. He's also said, literally, in the same press conferences, he said, I have absolute control. He said, I'm in charge, and I have no responsibility for this. I mean, it's incredible once you break it down. Once you see it, it must have been like the little boy felt in the crowd when the naked emperor went past, and everyone else is still cheering the robes. But there he is, as naked as the day he was born.
Well, he also said, I have a hunch that this is going to go away. A hunch. So this is the President of the United States, the leader of the free world. And the Republicans can turn around and say, oh, yeah, well, you know, he's positive. Well, how about some facts on it, first of all? So just to get to my point in why I think they are actually still doing it, it's simply for the social stigma. Now, in America, James, I don't care what anyone tells me, you're either a winner or you're a loser. Okay,
right.
And for people to then go onto the social welfare system in the United States is a big black mark against your name. Now, as soon as the Americans start seeing their money dwindling down, and they're only going to get $1,200 from the welfare system anyway, they know that they're falling into the pool of being a loser. Now, keeping up with the Joneses and people like that in the United States and be able to afford guns is so important to them. To be able to say, yeah, I want a business, etc., etc. Now, as soon as that starts getting taken away from them, straight away they start feeling for their own sanity and their own survival. And that
is even more denigrated and demonised to use society's safety net. I mean, on a scale that even in this country we can't fully understand. You know, poverty deniers, people claiming food banks were full of fraudsters. That we've got it here, but on nothing like the scale. And we've still got a half-decent welfare state in place, of course, despite the best efforts of the last 10 years.
And remember as well, James, a lot of liberal commentators, they are the enemy. So if you were in the United States, I always think this when I listen to your show, you would be utterly despised. I don't mean to scare you, but you would be. They would.
I'm doing pretty well in the UK with the Nazis, mate.
They're very past as human beings. Now, just to make you one, just before I go, okay. Once a Tea Party person actually wrote in rural Louisiana, and they said that a lot of liberal commentators look down on people like me because we can't say the N-word. Well, we will want to. It's demeaning. So why do liberal commentators feel free to use the R-word, which is redneck, which is what you used? So as soon as you would start using
that refers to sunburn, doesn't it? Not to ethnicity.
No, but I think because the stigma is if you're a redneck, you're a racist.
I thought they wore it proudly, the badge of redneckery or racism. But you're right; it's another false equivalence. It's like claiming that Hillary Clinton's email arrangements are somehow comparable to a campaign team that's ended up with several members in jail. I don't want you to go yet because I want to push you to this final question.
Sure.
Which is, and sensitively, if you would, I'm sure I don't need to caution you there. If John McDaniel was here, if the people you've just described were here, and we said, but why would the government, and this division that Trump's trying to pull off between himself and the governors is suddenly even more sinister than it looked 10 minutes ago. But if you asked one of these people, why would they be doing this in bad faith? So, okay, let's entertain the possibility that it might retrospectively be the wrong response to lockdown. In the absence of widespread tracing and testing, I think it's highly unlikely that anyone's going to be able to make that argument when the dust has settled, but we'll allow that it's possible. So they might have made a mistake, but it would be a mistake made in good faith. So why would the government, in bad faith, try to cripple the country in this way, unless they honestly believed it was the best available alternative?
They won't be able to give you an answer, James.
There'd be one of those interminable silences on the line, and we'd end up with another viral clip.
Well, how would they be able to give you an answer?
I don't know, mate. I was hoping you could tell me after the quality of your contribution so far.
Oh, bless you. Well, that's going up against a professor of American politics.
I know. So why would they do it? And because secretly they hate us all, or secretly there's a new world order. This is why you get Bill Gates and George Soros being brought into the conversation as some sort of sinister overlords.
Well, yeah, I think
I don't know.
Basically because they feel that it's us versus them. It always has been, and it always will be. I.e., them being the people against the government. It
hasn't always been. It hasn't. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, I see what you mean.
Doesn't matter who's in charge whatsoever. And unfortunately, that sort of frame of mind is such ingrained. Like the deep roots of racism is so deeply entwined in the American society, especially when in the Deep South. You were looking at generations and generations of being able to untangle that. And unfortunately, remember, the United States has got 4 different time zones, East, West, and Central, and Mountain. So you have that many different time zones. You have that many different times of countries almost. I mean, because the society is so different.
And so to speak of them as a homogenous mass is a little bit risky. I hear you. That was brilliant. Thank you for that, Paul. 13 minutes after 11. Let's get some... Well, you ring me and tell me what you think. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Let's have another little listen to what goes on national television in America, because I still think... I mean, I know a lot more than I did 4 or 5 years ago about the vile websites in this country masquerading as respectable and bizarrely treated as respectable by... Some people in my profession, you get individuals booked to appear even on Newsnight who essentially just write hateful bile for money. But Fox News it's not just inviting these people on. It's entirely populated by them. So this has to be part of the reason why John McDaniel is dead, right?
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president.
At worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing.
All the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality. Without a vaccine, the flu would be far more deadly.
I mean, genuinely breathtaking, and perhaps it's the wrong question to be asking about how can people who watch that stuff end up suffering from a fatal case of ignorance, because I think the answer possibly lies in what we've just heard, or a large part of the answer. The question I'm then left with is how can people in this profession, the broadcasting profession, be allowed to do things like that? Not just sort of with regard to regulation and broadcasting rules. I perhaps unfashionably, I'm thinking of their consciences as well, or are they just the weapons grade equivalent of the people that they're gulling? That they are as blinkered and as bonkers as the people they appeal to. We've got a real chicken and egg situation going on. Can't wait to work out, or at least to hear what you think about it. And the FT creditably have taken down their paywalls on some of the stories that they are doing with particular reference to COVID-19. I really recommend you go and look at their economics editor's work on the death toll. The coronavirus pandemic, he writes, has already caused as many as 41,000 deaths in the UK, according to a Financial Times analysis of the latest data from the Office for National Statistics. If you follow Chris Giles, or if you look Chris Giles up on Twitter, he's done a thread really going to town on how he has conducted this analysis, incredibly transparent. And that estimate, of course, which he explains in some detail how he arrived at it, is more than double the official figure of 17,337 released by ministers on Tuesday. Because that, of course, counts only those who have died in hospitals after testing positive for the virus. And I hesitate to say this because it's a fairly swinging statement, or question, actually. I would prefer questions. It makes you wonder what the point of those press conferences is, doesn't it? I mean, the key bit of information, as one lady yesterday who was grieving for her dead father said she'd stopped watching them because she'd come to realise, having realised that her late father wouldn't even have made the statistics, she'd realised ahead of the rest of us through personal tragedy that these numbers were largely meaningless. If the actual number of dead turns out to be, as this analysis predicts, more than double the official figure. What the hell are we doing watching these people behind their podiums every day? Being asked, where is the PPE for X? And being told, oh, we've got lots of PPE Y. What's the point of that? What is the point of that exercise? What is the point of asking about death rates if the official figure is dwarfed by the actual figure? What is the point about asking about PPE shortages if they will simply respond by telling you about the PPE that we've got? It seems strange. I know you're increasingly irritated by my defences of Matt Hancock, and I completely understand why. Nobody's infallible. I may well look back on this and think that I'd taken temporary leave of my senses when I suggested that he had the air of a man who was doing his best with a very bad hand of cards. But yesterday, he's looked close to broken a couple of times, hasn't he? And yesterday was, well, it was horrible. Horrible to watch. And speaking of fallibility, a lot of you are correcting me, including Wayne in Basildon, but also Max, who sent me an article explaining it, that the term redneck wasn't to do with sunburn. It has its origins in the union movement of mine workers as a neckerchief, if you like, rather than as sunburn. I don't know why I thought that. I just got one of those things filed away or forever, and it's completely wrong. So anyway, we've cleared that up. Probably not a phrase I should use again in that context. A synonym for racist, which people don't like being called. It's probably the best way to explain it. Now, the idea of dying because you believed nonsense is not funny to me. Some people find it amusing or grounds for schadenfreude. I, as ever, want to help people stop believing nonsense, especially fatal nonsense, like the idea that the American government has gone into lockdown for nefarious reasons. But to do that, you have to understand how people can end up believing it. And that's where you come in. Lisa is in Southampton. Lisa, what can you tell us?
Yeah, I'm American, but I've been here for 36 years. Okay. I still vote in the States, but I still have a lot of family and friends there, and I just think it's a drip of the news cycle, and I just went on. One of my Facebook friends posted yet another Trump post, so I went into some of those websites to see what they were looking at, and I'm just horrified. I'm horrified.
Well, give us the highlights, if you can bear to. Give the or the lowlights, if you prefer.
I'm a history teacher as well, and I teach politics here in the UK. And I thought I was looking, when I teach the kids on the rise of Nazi Germany, and I see the posters, and I see the mock-ups, and it frightens me. It really does. I see the protesters with guns in America. I don't recognize that America. It's changed so much that I could never live there again. I just couldn't. I can't take that mentality.
What sort of thing are you seeing?
It's like pictures, mock-ups on some of the websites of the Dream Team with Trump in the front. Trump self-imposed on a picture in the background of like the State Building, which, I'm sorry.
I see. So you mean a sort of...
It's a superhero. He's like a superhero. I'm
just hearing from you, more North Korean than Nazi, actually.
Well, it's frightening. It's frightening. I never thought, because obviously I feel I'm quite well educated. Well, I am very well educated, and I am very Democrat. Sure. I've always been a Democrat. My dad helped, volunteered for Obama. But I think what they're doing is they're not reading facts. There's no scientific. These are same people that think that climate change is a hoax. So it doesn't surprise me at their attitude to this.
Funded by the same dark money as well, usually. That's something that came up earlier.
And also I think the gun lobby is behind this as well, because they want people out on the streets. They're afraid that we're going to take away their guns during this time, this lockdown. And
of course they are. Yes, I see. So all of the most sinister elements of American politics are sort of united at the moment. But I still haven't got this thing. I'm sorry to labour it, and there's no shame in not being able to help me, because I can't help myself. But Trump's in charge now, so these weirdos who fetishise him they've got their man in the White House.
Yes.
And I know that he's tried to He's tried to shout heads and tails when it comes to government. So national and local is something that he's. I know what he's doing. You know what he's doing. But if you asked them, if you asked the people posting this stuff on Facebook, why would any politician want to damage the country they govern, or the state they govern, or the county they govern? Why would any politician want to do that?
Well, because he's
unless
not like
they
any
honestly
politician
thought it was
had. He doesn't have.
No, but that's not good enough. That's what would they say? Why would any politician want to damage the territory they govern unnecessarily? Why would they not? Why would they do it unless it was the best available option? Or are we crediting them with too much thoughtfulness, even asking that question?
Well, I think the thing is, I don't even think they think about that. They live in this alternative, unreality. They want America to return to the white picket fences and and all the residents with all white people, and that they want it does come down to complete ignorance, I think, and sometimes. And my own brother voted for Trump.
With a side order of racism, with a side order of exceptionalism.
My brother is very intelligent, and he's very well off, and he's a really great guy, but he is not voting for him this election. He is voting for Biden. And a lot of his friends who are very wealthy as well, they are also voting for Biden. They will not vote Trump again, and because they
voted for him last time. What did they see last time that they no longer see?
They're Republicans.
Oh, so it didn't matter who the candidate was.
They didn't like Obama, and they're very wealthy Republicans. I mean, they're 1%ers, and so they thought their money would be safer with a Republican. And now they realize that the man is a complete idiot. And also, he doesn't know the Constitution. I went to school the same time Trump did. I'm a little bit younger. I'm 10 years younger than him. I don't know where he was in Constitution class, but he certainly doesn't know our government. He has no idea how it works.
But that doesn't, again, I mean, maybe this is a slightly luxurious exercise, trying to get inside the minds of people who arguably don't have control over their own minds. But you mentioned the wealthier Republicans. It's why talk of economic concerns was so bogus during the last election, because I mean, the idea that he has the interests of poor people in his heart is beyond hilarious, isn't it?
Donald Trump and his family. I mean,
always and forever. And again, it's one of those. Lisa, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. But again, it's one of those issues where, it's a lazy, and well, I don't know if it's lazy, but it's certainly an overused illustration. But it's why the parable or the tale of the Emperor's new clothes is so prevalent and powerful, because it is literally the case that everybody sensible can see that he's got no clothes on, and yet the crowd is still convinced that he's wearing magnificent robes. And that's the parallel I draw with the sort of fetishistic stuff that Lisa's seeing on Facebook. Leanne's in Tunbridge Wells. Leanne, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, this is a can of worms that you've opened up, by the way, just to say that quickly. There's so many issues with the United States, and I think it is three things that all meeting at the same time that has made things worse. You've got one that you've touched on, which is the media, and how you've got the likes of Fox News.
Or elements of the media, just lying and getting paid a lot of money just to lie to the public.
And not just that, when you've got like a televangelist pastor who's blowing wind saying it will take away the coronavirus, and you have people watching that and believing that. So that's one element. The second element you have...
Send me money.
Yeah, send me money, this will help you. Yeah, Alex Jones, obviously, who says that the Sandy Hook was a hoax, and people believe him and take his word. But anyway, the second element I think you have is... And no one's actually touched on this, and I think it's actually really quite important. You have all these different laws in different states, and instead of Trump governing, because it's not people versus the government, because, as I say, the people who believe Trump, they
they think it is. These people... that's the incredible thing about it. They think it is people versus the government, but they love the guy who's in charge of the government. I'm going to run out of time, so finish your points, and I won't interrupt you again.
Okay. Basically, what it is, because when you've got Trump, he's tweeting saying about certain states that are run by Democratic governors, saying to his supporters, this isn't right, this lockdown, do something about it. So he's putting that threat to his own supporters, saying any state that's got a Democrat in charge, fight them. And that's that's what he's tweeting. Yeah, so they love Trump. It's not them, but it's not the people versus the government. It's the people love Trump. This mob mentality. He's brainwashed them after years of them listening to the Congress and the likes who have their pockets lined from the NRA and from people who make billions. They
think they're owning the liberals by dicing with death.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course they do. They, because Trump tells them, because they're so brainwashed by these years of having this television stuff.
Do you feel sorry for them?
I do. I know a lot of Americans who, so again, you mentioned this guy who died. I know someone who knows a guy who was very much like, oh, this is a hoax, whose mum died. And
God. Has that woken him up or not? Do you know?
I don't think it has. How can it? Well, because you say they're so gone.
You'd have to dig even deeper, wouldn't you? Because to admit or to acknowledge the reality.
Yeah.
Oh,
they're too far gone, and it all comes down to these billionaires, and Trump's including that, who, as you say, you've said it earlier, only care about their own pocket, and they brainwash the people to vote against having their own Medicare system.
And we've got our own pound shop versions riding high on the hog in this country at the moment, getting jobs in government and communications departments, having spent their previous years working for these dark money-funded outfits that don't tell us who it is they're lobbying for. Oh, it's all so clear, isn't it, Leanne, once you've got your spectacles on, but there we are, there's still thousands of people, millions of people up and down this country, let alone America, cheering the Emperor's robes. It's 11:30. Another cracking call. Thank you for that. We've somewhat unexpectedly dedicated most of the programme this morning to trying to unravel the mysteries of American politics. We'll continue with that, but I'm taking PMQs live at 12 noon, and it should be on time, even in the current circumstances, because the new Speaker of the House of Commons, or newish Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, is a stickler for punctuality. It's emerged already. But I did mention at the top of the show that I was interested in hearing from people, business owners in particular, who would be keen to help address some of the shortages that we're hearing about with regard to PPE. I think the grimmest element of some of the coverage has been the numbers of people who have reported, and they end up generally coming to the media. Actually, I heard it on another radio station this morning. The presenter saying to a minister, but they're literally ringing me up and saying that I can't get anyone to answer the phone. I could dedicate my production line to gowns, or I could make masks. I currently make X, but I could easily make Y. There's no point me making Y until you tell me who I would be giving it to and who I could talk to. And I think it is against that backdrop that Aliza Rager has run the programme. She is the owner of the incredibly famous underwear brand Janet Rager, set up, I think, Aliza, by your mum. What did you want to tell me?
Well, a few weeks ago, it's one of life's sort of strange quirks. I was talking to my distributor in the United States, a gentleman I work with, who is incredibly entrepreneurial, and he produces millions and millions of pairs of socks in his factories in China, amongst other things. And he mentioned to me, I have just converted, or he had converted, the factory to producing masks. Now, these are civilian surgical masks, the type that the disposable ones that you are seeing people wearing really all over Europe, all over China, all over Hong Kong. And I'm saying, how many are you producing? He said to me, 80 million per month. I have to repeat that. 80 million per month. And we have none here. You couldn't buy them. This was sort of 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Couldn't get them on Amazon. You can't get them. So I then immediately wrote to one of somebody I worked with at Superdrug, one of the directors, who was incredibly responsive and immediately passed that on down the line to his medical supply chain. And it was passed, to my contact, to my producer in the United States. It took them a week to respond back to him to say he's not set up as a supplier.
Right.
I mean, how long does it take to set up a supplier?
So let me get this absolutely clear. You could have got hold of some of the kit that your contact in America is manufacturing in China, and you went to your No? Have I made a mistake already?
I went to Superdrug because Superdrug have, I don't know how...
yes, no, and you said to them, I can get this stuff, and he then sought guidance on what to do next.
His medical team. So the medical teams were then in contact with my man in the States whose factory it is.
Yes.
And they came back to him after about a week saying, oh, you're not set up as a...
And were they following government guidelines, as far as we know, rather than...
I have no idea.
Okay, I see. So he had the kit, but he's not an established supplier, largely because he was making socks. He was making socks 3 months ago, so it's not exactly a revelation that he's not a registered or official supplier of masks.
It's not, but he is supplying China, he is supplying other European countries, and they are certified masks. They are...
they meet some international standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They are what we refer to as civilian masks, which, again, I've been following the various conversations. They may or may not be 100%, but surely something is better than nothing. And we are seeing in Europe very clearly where masks have been worn more consistently, the infection rate is lower. Now, I'm not a medical person. I'm in the
I don't think you need to be, Elisa. I think that's an
I just want to make that
fact.
very clear. I am in the lingerie business. I also contacted the MD of Boots. No response there whatsoever. I also contacted, as did my husband, various bodies at the NHS, and I have friends who helped me up the supply ladder because obviously this is not my field of expertise at all.
Sure.
So eventually I did get a response from the NHS, a very young, very inexperienced sounding lady saying, have you got gowns? I went, no, I have civilian masks.
Right.
Disposable masks that are being used on a daily basis for people to wear.
It is. I mean, it is. This isn't a defence of what you've encountered. It's more explanation than excuse. But it's as if the port of call that you needed doesn't exist, isn't it? It's as if the sort of destination that you presumed you'd find actually doesn't exist.
You would think Boots and Superdrug, being our two largest distribution channels of all things medical to the civilian population, would be the most obvious port of call.
You would, but of course, they're not here to explain themselves. We just add your testimony to the growing pile of concerns. And I do want to add one thing, is that civilians should never wear the surgical quality or the surgical standard masks, precisely because that would add to the shortages in the supply chain. But you're talking about the kind of masks that you can buy over the counter in the chemist, which we are increasingly being encouraged
I'm talking about
to
the
consider.
Daily usable, disposable. They're made of paper. They are churning out 80 million a month.
It's quite incredible, isn't it?
And they are certified.
Well, keep us posted, won't you? I mean, what are you doing otherwise? What are you doing with your own business, if you don't mind me asking?
My own business, we were absolutely on the verge of launching a fabulous new collection with
You have to say that. You have to say
Well, no, we were. We absolutely were.
I believe you.
A very significant UK retailer, I can't say who.
Oh, okay.
And sadly, this has just been, it's just been put on hold. You know, life will go on, this will pass, and everybody is going to get dressed up and go out and have fun when it's all over.
Sooner. Let's hope it's sooner rather than later. Elisa Rager, many thanks indeed for that first-hand account of what happened when you just tried to help. You drew in international contacts to the tune of 80 million masks coming off a production line a week, and drew a complete blank. I don't know whether anyone's to blame for that or whether there should be anger, but it's befuddlement and bafflement for me. Just this sense that you didn't know where to go. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. It's incredible. 80 million a month, not a week. I do apologise. 11:42 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQ's on the way at 12. And I'm interested in more calls like that. Calls where you've tried to help. You have. I mean, because we spoke to Professor Howell, didn't we? He's turned his laboratory down in Brighton into a hand sanitizer production line. Not as easy as you may, or I may presume, as unqualified laymen and women, but he's done it. He's achieved the requisite standards. And we've heard there was a businessman in Derby on the East Midlands News, on Central News, 2 nights ago, talking about how he was desperate to turn his production line over to the production of PPE. I think he normally makes traditional garments, but he couldn't get an answer. He didn't know where to go. And that phrase that I used a couple of weeks ago with a really grim sense of foreboding, because it was informed by genuine heartbreak and tragedy. And I'll tell you, I worked out afterwards, I haven't told you yet why that it disturbed me so much to use the phrase, because I suddenly remembered where I'd used it before. There's nobody upstairs. Whether or not this is always the case, or whether or not it's the result of austerity and cuts to the public sector, or whether it's a result of this cultish, fetishistic drive for smaller government, which hopefully we can consign to the skip for at least a generation after this tragedy has ended, after this crisis is over. We can recognise the importance not just of having sufficient provision in place, but having more than enough in place in case terrible things happen. But the notion of there being nobody upstairs in local or national government, the people to whom you just presume you turn in times of crisis, or in this context, the people that you call, the people that you just call to say, oh, look, I've got this contact, I've got that contact, I'd like to help with this, where do I go? There's no chain. There's no one upstairs. And I first became aware of that during the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower crisis. And we took calls from people who 2-3 days after losing everything they'd ever owned were still utterly unable to work out where they were supposed to turn. That's what society is, you know. Society is a safety net. And by portraying the safety net as a trampoline for decades in the right-wing press, largely led by Rupert Murdoch, who of course also owns Fox News, by portraying that safety net as some sort of trampoline that people leap into irresponsibly to bounce about gaily while the rest of us go to work, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. I don't know if there's a link to be drawn, but I think when we pay our taxes, we presume that we're paying for a service we might need one day. We're finding anything out during the aftermath of Grenfell, during the response to the floods, of course, that we were talking about last year. And now, in the context of COVID-19, it's as if we've got rid of the safety net because we thought it was a trampoline. And we've also, in order to, I don't know, fulfill the fantasies of super rich funders of mysterious organisations seeking to influence government policy, we've shrunk government to a point where there is nobody upstairs when crisis hits. That's just me thinking out loud. Don't take it as gospel, and feel free to laugh it off. But you get to share your thoughts with me on the programme, and occasionally I feel compelled to share mine with you. And we've taken an unexpected day off in a way from cataloguing the catastrophes over which the government is presiding. The fact that patients are being turned away from the Nightingale Hospital, 50 people it's reported, all of whom are intubated and on ventilators, due to staffing issues, according to documents reported by The Guardian. I don't take The Guardian during this hiatus. I can see it online, but I take The Times, and it's The Times' report that I'm referring to, but The Times' report, of course, refers back to the Guardian. So they began treating patients on April the 7th, the documents said, but 50 people had been turned away due to staffing shortages, which is, I guess, unsurprising, but still pretty chilling. And then you've got the squabble over why they didn't sign up to the EU-wide procurement scheme. They've done a bit of a trump on that one. They've offered up various... We didn't know, we didn't get the emails, or then yesterday the senior civil servant in the Foreign Office said it was a political decision. I think it fairly obviously was a political decision, don't you? And now we have the problem of knowing that they knew while they continue to claim that they didn't. That's what I mean by Trumpian. That's shouting heads and tails, and then whatever happens, whatever the truth turns out to be, they can claim that they told us the truth all along. 11:49 is the time. Peter Julian got in touch with the programme because he felt, he really wanted to tell us about his experiences, and we felt that they possibly deserved a bigger platform. Peter, tell me more.
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm pretty good, mate. What you've been through the mill a bit lately, I gather. So, talk us through what you've been facing.
Great. Okay. Well, I know you're under some time constraints, so just push me along if you need to. Well, so, just to give your audience a background.
I'm just going to take I'm going to push you along now. I'm going to just take a moment to try to improve the quality of your phone line, Peter. Bear with me a second. I'll do a little bit of housework while we try and tinker with that. I am absolutely indebted, I have to say, to the engineering department at LBC, at Global Radio, for the way that they've set me and many of your other favourite presenters up. And I'll be giving them a proper vote of thanks at the end of the week. But of course, there's people at the other end of the phone lines who don't have the technological clout that I have in my glorified shed. Let's get to Peter. Peter, take it from the top.
Okay, so just to give your viewers, or listeners even, James, an overview. I live in South Manchester. My local hospital is Wythenshawe. For anyone that knows it, you might know it from your Chiltern days, James. It's a sprawling hospital next to what used to be, I think I'm right in saying, the largest social housing project when we had social housing in Europe. So, 54, don't smoke. I've had 3 days off sick, I reckon, in 12 years. Wow. No pre-existing conditions. Whilst I'm not, well, I used to not be skinny, James, but I had middle-aged spread is what I'd admit to. Yeah. I cycle every week. I home exercise every day. And I made an error, James, which I wanted to share with your listeners. The error I made was I went on all the websites and foolishly forgot that statistical information from NHS England or the World Health Organisation, A, is about medical planning for a population over a year. B, isn't our data, because when it was built 3 weeks ago, it was lifted from elsewhere. So we don't actually have any UK data that's relevant yet. And I just thought, this is good. I'm off the list, because all these things make me off the list.
As in, you're not at risk. So you went through the lists of people.
I might be at risk, James, but it was a risk of paracetamol and a week feeling awful. Yes. Not actually that I'd be on a ventilator for 9 days.
Wow.
So
that's a bit of a spoiler alert there, Peter.
Sorry, mate, I've ruined it already. You're the professional. I'm just a humble, sweet seller.
So let's take it from when you fell sick, when you fell ill.
Okay. So let me just tell the team, all the listeners, what happened. So Monday the 23rd of March, I had some aches and pains. Being vaguely paranoid, I go on the NHS COVID checker, and guess what? I don't think it's me. I've got aches and pains doesn't equal COVID.
Right.
I plant some spuds on the Tuesday.
Good.
And on the Wednesday, I woke up with aches and pains. Again, thought, Pete, you're just old, mate. You're just an old boy, and you're to blame for a bit of digging. Instead of no symptoms, you're being paranoid. Yeah. Now, Friday the 27th is a key day, James. Friday the 27th, I fall asleep in the garden with COVID, which went on to mean I had the very best tan in the critical care unit at Wythenshawe Hospital, which is a good thing. I get to the weekend and feel breathless. On Monday, I call out the paramedics because I'm now feeling really bad. I can hardly walk.
Right.
He looks at me, and there's no blame attached to this. I've got the report in front of me, James.
Yeah.
But based on the information we all had when I went in on the 2nd of April, have some paracetamol, Pete. You may have COVID, you may not. Who knows, because we've got no testing kits. But in any case, given your profile, sit there, and if it gets worse, ring us. So I go from, just to remind your viewers of the dates, Monday the 23rd with a few aches and pains, no symptoms whatsoever, to the 2nd of April, when my wife called an ambulance for me. I can't talk, I can't walk. I'm taken into Wythenshawe Hospital and immediately put on a ventilator for 5 days. meaning, of course, I'm dead, aren't I? Without a ventilator, I'm dead.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, it does. If you're on a ventilator, it's because your body can't breathe. So that's
it's keeping you alive. It's breathing
that's
for you,
right.
essentially.
Were we going back 40 years ago, James, anybody in a ventilator wouldn't be here. So I
and just to drive the point home, you had been perhaps not paranoid, but you'd been incredibly cautious, and you'd followed the official guidance at every turn. And here
James,
you are.
more than that. If you knew me, I do the detail, and we'd locked ourselves down. I put my daughter out of school early. I disassociated with everybody. I'd done the research. I'd visit all the websites. So it's more than here's me guessing. And, and by the way, when you get a paramedic in who's making the same guesses as you, it's not unreasonable to assume that,
of course not. That's the point I wanted to stress, is that you haven't been blindsided by this. You've tried to address it head on.
So
and then you got,
on a ventilator.
Yeah.
And by the way, James, my son is a junior doctor in his first year. He assumed, as my son, being on a ventilator is the worst part. Well, let me tell your listeners it's not. Because as far as you're concerned, you could have been on it an hour or 10 years. You could be alive or dead, actually, you don't know.
Right.
So being on a ventilator is almost the easiest part of this journey. Surprising as that sounds. Medically, of course, it's the very worst part. But from your patient perspective, you don't know what's going on, so it doesn't matter.
Because you know what you're not aware of can't drain you or stress you out.
You knew, yeah. So,
and then you came out. We are going to run out of time. Actually, you did warn me. And then you came out the other end.
So, cut a long story short, James.
Yeah.
I'm in intensive care for 11 days. I'm in hospital for 16. I came back on our Saturday. What's the key points I want to get over?
Go on.
Number one, take 154-year-olds of my same fitness. There'll be about 5 of us who'll have no symptoms and simply go infect the others. There'll be about 15, 20 of us that will have an unfortunate DNA inheritance, which means they'll all put us in intensive care, and the rest will be paracetamol.
Those of us who've had very, very mild symptoms possibly get lulled into a false sense of security. And how are you feeling now, Pete? How
am I feeling now, James? Incredibly grateful to the individuals in the NHS and the NHS organisation, because frankly, I had a welcome home but reception from my neighbours. You only get that if you're alive. So thank you, NHS. Yeah. Incredibly angry with Boris Johnson, who's gone from his transcript of his speech leaving hospital and you can see it, and I'm not going to quote it, but essentially, aren't these foreign workers wonderful? They're all my pals. To a bloke that only at the Treasury Committee evidence said uncontrolled immigration is driving down wages and putting the NHS at risk, whilst our good friend Dominic Raab was saying the NHS monolith should be broken up, and whilst Michael Gove was saying the NHS was under massive strain. What I saw with my own eyes, James, and I'm angry about it, is the team taking daily hits as a result of the malign success of the 2016 Leave campaign. I've seen the sort of racism aimed at these people that I've not seen since the 80s, James, and that's awful.
I understand why you want to make that point.
Well done, Boris, for that successful malign campaign. Own it.
Which opened up the doors and allowed people to publicly state things. Well, some of them even made posters that even 10 years ago would have been beyond the pale of polite society. I'm going to let your political points stand, and you've taken me right up to the news. I'm glad that you. Obviously, I'm glad that you're better. Shall I make you smile on a completely different note before we bid each other farewell?
Is that about my tan?
I haven't seen your tan, but you did inquire after my familiarity with the streets of Wythenshawe, Peter.
And Chiltern.
And, well, Chiltern, my well-established familiarity with Chiltern come hardy, but people are perhaps less familiar with my relationship historically with Wythenshawe, and I've got a horrible feeling there might not be a blue plaque up, because I'm not sure the building has survived. But in 1990, Peter, I gave my Sir Galahad to the Forum Theatre in Wythenshawe.
And I wanted you to know, James, that was really the big point I was wanting to support and make. And the rest of it was just because I'm desperately needy.
Top man. Mind how you go. And recuperate. I know you don't need me to tell you this, but rest. This idea that, as you've discovered, it's one of the earliest mistakes I think we made publicly, media, politics, whoever it was, describing it as something you fight, describing it as something that, you know, David Cameron said that because Boris Johnson played a belligerent game of tennis, he was somehow well equipped to cope with a potentially fatal virus. The best thing you can do if you are suffering from this, whether you've got serious symptoms like Peter or much milder symptoms like the ones I went through 2 or 3 weeks ago, the best thing you can do is nothing. Apart from taking the medicines and you know, sustenance that you need, the best thing you can do is nothing. Thank you, Peter. God bless you. The time now is 12 noon.